Hey everybody, welcome to Discover DB2. My name's Michael Kravick, and today we're going to be talking about installing Db2 Developer Community Edition. It's a mouthful. It was a lot easier to say Express C. But the reason we're going to cover this installation is because IBM is taking a different approach. They're trying to get much more developer friendly. In the past, it was really hard to figure out where to even get the installation files. If you didn't know what to type into Google or into Knowledge Center, you could easily get lost. It was also a little bit of a pain to install. You weren't exactly sure whether you were supposed to be using a GUI, whether you were using DB2 install or DB2 setup. It got a little bit confusing once you got the files down. So we're going to cover installation of the product on my Mac in this specific case, but don't worry, it's going to be similar regardless to what operating system you're going to be using. And then once we've got it installed, I'm going to show the very basics of moving around. A lot of times when you're playing with a new software, or at least in my past experience, great, I've got it down, it's installed, but I don't even know the basics of what to do next. So we're going to talk about how to at least get the environment on, activate a database, connect and shut everything back down, and where to go look in an error log if there's any problems. So let's go ahead and get started. So earlier I mentioned that sometimes it was difficult to find where to get the binaries, the install files for DB2. If you didn't know exactly what to type into Google or how to navigate the Knowledge Center, you couldn't get to it, at least in a timely manner. But that's not the case anymore. Let's go ahead and type in what we're looking for. DB2 Developer Community Edition. You're going to notice one of the first things it comes up with right after the ad is what we were looking for. So we're going to click on that and it'll take us to a main splash page. Now, if you want to, you can go ahead and go straight to download now. And that will tell you where to go and what to do to download. But I wanted to point out that down here on the bottom, past the cheesy video, which isn't bad actually, is a compare features and pricing. This actually will help you quite a bit in your decision making. And it covers a little bit about what I was discussing before, that the Developer Community Edition is pretty much full feature free version. There are no handcuffs, there are no features that are suppressed or that you have to pay for. As long as you are under a certain size, 4 core, 16 gig of memory, or 100 gig database size, and you are not in production, this one's for you. Now I'm going to point out here that this is pretty much the dockerized version. It's for Mac, Windows, and Linux. Now I am on a Mac OS Sierra. It's going to be pretty much the same thing you will see in the other versions. No matter what happens, once you kick off that wizard, the wizard is going to ask you the same questions and do the install. So let's go ahead and download the Developer Edition. So one thing that we just skipped that I want to point out is the fact that you may have to create an IBM ID. In this specific case, it was cached, so I sped right through, but you're going to end up creating one. This is what allows you to get into certain areas of IBM or different resources of IBM. And matter of fact, it's what I use to log in and open up online PMRs. Once you've entered that information in, you're going to do the basic questions here. No, I'm not a first-time user. Yes, I agree to all the legalese. And I'm going to hit confirm. It's going to take me to a main page with all the different downloads. Now, one of the things I had mentioned is, hey, they're trying to get more developer friendly with Docker. And matter of fact, almost all of these images here are going to require you to have Docker. There is a non-Docker server installation. We're not going to do that right now. We're just going to go to the download now page. And for those Mac users that have done this before, we're going to end up downloading a DMG file. The DMG file we're going to launch, move into an application, and it's going to end up unzipping and installing itself. This is very similar to if you downloaded a zip file in Windows, extracted it, and hit go. Or a tar file in Linux or Unix. So I'm going to go ahead and open up the DMG file. It's extracting itself, If you're familiar with Mac, I've got to do a drag and drop into my applications folder. This allows me to access it via a shortcut, usually through the Launchpad. So I'm going to go ahead and close these, go to my Launchpad, and here's IBM DB2. So let's go ahead and launch it. Now we're going to go through the basics again, continue to I agree. And one of the things I'm going to point out here is that we are just installing the database server. This is unique. It is detecting that I have Docker on my machine already. If you do not have Docker installed on your machine, it's going to give you another option here. And matter of fact, it's going to tell you you need to install Docker first. You don't have to go do it as a separate install. It will install Docker for you, then install the database server, set up all the containers it needs. Because it's detecting Docker on my machine, it's bypassing that, and all I have to do is go to database server. Now, we're going to set up some initial credentials. Data Server Manager is another tool. We'll talk about it at a later time, but it has an administrator ID just like you would for your instance or your basic DB2 configuration. So we're going to set up a very uncreative admin name, set up an ID and password. It's automatically defaulting to DB2 inst1. If you're familiar with DB2, you're gonna know that that's usually your default instance ID. And for those that are new to DB2, you can think of your instance ID or your instance as the overall environment that your database resides in. So I'm going to go ahead and set a new password. And I'm going to create a database for transactional workloads. I work in OLTP most of the time, highly available 24/7, but if you wanted to go into warehousing or you wanted a different type of database to play with, you have a choice of which type you would end up going with. I'm going to hit continue. It's going to go through some initial install. Now the first thing it's doing is it's checking to see if Docker is online. If you don't have Docker, it's going to immediately go get Docker and go through an installation. Matter of fact, don't be alarmed if in the middle of your installation here, it stops and gives you a window saying, I'm installing Docker and I need an administrative password. After it gets past Docker's installation, this is where it goes. And what you see right now is it's basically downloading the tar file, the actual DB2 Community Edition tar file that will install the binaries to run. Now this is going to take a little bit of time, so I'm going to probably pause right about here and bring you back as we finish. So once we launched Developer Edition, you're going to come to one of multiple different splash pages. You could come to this resource page, you could come to the DSM login. Regardless of where you come, we just want to go to the command line. We want to execute DB2 from a normal terminal window. So if you go up here to the top and you come down to Open DB2 Terminal, it's going to say, look, to get this going, we have to execute a specific container within Docker, and we have to change over to the instance ID. So we're going to cut that or copy that. And instead of opening terminal here, I use a different one. I use iterm2. So I'm explicitly opening it there. And let's open it up a little bit and cut and paste the Docker command to get the container moving and bring the DB2 instance online. You know it's worked when you've switched over and you see that your DB2 inst1 at whatever your host name is. So I'm going to clear this. Now, you're here, what do you do? How do I know if things work? Well, the thing to keep in mind is that you have a DB2 environment called an instance that may or may not be online. Underneath that instance is the sample database. So let's go ahead and start the DB2 instance, the DB2 environment. Docker may have already gotten this up and running, but we'll see. To go ahead and start it, you type db2 start. Boom. The instance is online now. So the environment is there, but the database may not be active. Let's see. db2 list active databases. What pops up? Nothing. Okay, so a database is not online. Is there a database? db2 list database directory. There we go. So the sample database exists, but it is not active. Now, you can start a database one of two ways. You can do it explicitly or implicitly. If I just connect to the database will come online. And then when I terminate that connection, the database will go offline. That's not always ideal. As a best practice, I always explicitly activate. So db2 activate database sample. Boom. Now, don't worry about this command, or learn. This allows me to do command line recall. So I'm going back to my list active databases. Before, this didn't show anything. Boom. Now I've got the sample database there. I don't have any connections. You can see applications connected currently is 0. So just to confirm that, we can issue db2 list applications. Nothing's there. But if I issue a connect statement, I am now connected to the database and can throw commands at it like a simple select statement. But I want to show you that there's a connection. So let's go ahead and do the list applications again. There's my active connection right now. Now, I don't want this anymore. I want to disconnect from the database. I'm not going to execute any more commands. You're going to issue a db2 terminate. We are no longer connected. List applications shows nothing's there. So let's go ahead and stop our database now. Remember what I said, when you do an explicit activation, it will stay up and active until you tell it otherwise. So db2 deactivate database sample. Now the database itself is down. We had a command to show active databases, right? db2 list active databases. Nothing's there. However, we know the database still exists. So we have severed our connection. We've deactivated the database. Now let's stop the instance with a db2 stop. The database is down. So let's review real quick. We launched the Docker container that had db2 in it with the instance that was installed. It wasn't online. We issued a db2 start to bring the instance online. We saw that there were no active databases, so we issued a activate database sample, which explicitly brought it online. I've shown you how to issue a basic connect so you can throw commands against the database. We then disconnected our connection, deactivated the database, and brought the db2 instance down. The only other thing I will show you before we end this is where the db2 error log is. So right now we're in the instance home directory. It is usually placed in a specific spot by default, and that is SQLib db2 dump. And the specific file is called db2diag.log. Now, there are many different best practices, and one of them is to move the error log somewhere else. So if it's suddenly filled up with a ton of error messages, it wouldn't stop your database. We'll show you a little later on how to determine that and where it should go. But that about covers it. So we've talked about the different editions, we've talked about where to go get them, how to install them, the importance of Docker, how to launch into a terminal window, how to activate the environment, the database, disconnect, and bring everything down. I hope you find this useful, and I look forward to speaking to you all soon on our next topic.